On Freya's wedding day, my lover leaped from the 18th floor. I opened his studio, and it was filled with portraits of Freya. The brushstrokes were rough and extreme, yet they carried his fervent love. A friend said, Oscar loved Freya for 10 years, she was his only light. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Oscar blocked in the classroom by the school bully. I silently closed the door. Later, he knocked on my window in the rain, his voice hoarse and desperate. Tracy, don't you love me anymore? Professor of astrophysics Oscar had recently discovered a new asteroid. During an interview, however, his strikingly cold, outstanding looks shot him to the top of trending topics. The focus of the discussion quickly shifted from the asteroid to his almost supernatural face. When it was revealed that the asteroid was named after his beloved, the internet exploded. People praised their fairy tale love, while trying to uncover who she was. I held my phone, unable to hide my smile. At the end of the video, the reporter asked with a smile, Professor Shin, do you have any words for your beloved? Oscar froze. His dark eyes trembled slightly, like the night sky. Happy wedding anniversary. His tone was calm, but laced with a barely detectable, almost broken despair. I froze instantly. Happy wedding anniversary? Mabel nudged me teasingly. Tracy, he seems so cold, but he's actually quite romantic, calling it a new wedding anniversary. Is that so? Looking at the deep affection in Oscar's eyes on the video, my cheeks flushed instantly. I had been with Oscar for 10 years. I had helped him transform from a gloomy, barely alive youth into the refined and graceful professor he was today. 10 years ago, he transferred to my school and became my desk mate. His skin was pale as jade, his features delicate, but his gaze toward me was full of impatience. Now, he had named an asteroid after me, and when talking about his beloved, his usually stern face softened with affection and warmth. Today was our first wedding anniversary. I was lying on the sofa, my hand resting on my stomach. I was waiting to tell him I was pregnant as soon as he got home. But instead, I received the news of Oscar's death. He had jumped from the 18th floor. Clutched tightly in his hand was a note. Death is just a return to the universe. In billions of years, we will meet again in the stars and the sea. With Mabel's company, I handled Oscar's affairs. He had written a will, leaving all his property to be donated after his death. For some reason, I had been strangely calm these days. Seeing Mabel with swollen eyes, biting her teeth in anger at Oscar's portrait, yet still forcing herself to comfort me, I almost wanted to laugh. After the funeral, I received a call from the lawyer. Miss Tracy, Mr. Oscar owns a villa that is not part of the donation. If you have time, you can come and handle it. The villa was in the suburbs south of the city. When I pushed open the door, I was so shocked by what I saw that I couldn't speak. The hall was filled with portraits. The brushstrokes were rough and extreme, as if an amateur had casually sketched them. But the people in the portraits, because of the intense love conveyed, looked vivid and alive. It was Freya, the beauty queen from our high school. In 10 years, I had never heard Oscar speak her name. I didn't know he had hidden his feelings for her so deeply. I staggered forward and leaned on the table for support. On the table were several pieces of amber, neatly arranged. Each contained a piece of fruit candy, a dried flower, and a fragment of a nail art design. The amber was smooth and round, obviously something he frequently held in his hands. The things Freya had carelessly thrown away were treasures to him. Yet the wedding ring I had chosen for him was lying next to a dried-up paint box. My heart tightened, and tears involuntarily welled up in my eyes. Sitting down, I tortured myself by flipping open the notebook on the table. It documented Oscar's 10 years of unspoken love. On the first day he transferred to our school, he received a fruit candy from the beauty queen sitting in front of him, along with a friendly smile. It was like a ray of sunlight breaking into his pitch-black soul. That was the first untainted kindness he had received, after years of abuse and bullying. He fell for her immediately. He wanted to lock her away, possess her, and make her smile only for him. But he couldn't bear to pull such a bright girl into the darkness. The asteroid was his wedding gift to her. From front to back, there were only a few lines mentioning me. My new desk mate is too annoying, it's frustrating. We're married now. I regret it a bit, but I'll take responsibility for her. The breakfast I brought him when I feared he was hypoglycemic, the school bully I chased away for him, The way I held his hand and led him out of the fire his crazy father caused, the comfort I offered over the years, none of that was mentioned. What he couldn't forget were only Freya's bright smile from that time. Each of his words was like a dagger to my heart. I clenched my fists, breathing deeply. The air seemed to still carry the crisp scent of pine that clung to him. I felt a wave of nausea. Some people are just worthless, not deserving of redemption, not worthy of love. I placed my hand on my stomach. He didn't deserve for me to have his child. Just as I was about to stand up, a noise came from the door. Two figures pushed the door open. It was Oscar's childhood friend Adam and Freya. Adam's eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "This villa was left to you by Oscar. You were his only light. When he was in his darkest days, he found strength just by looking at your photo." Freya stood there, dazed, her eyes clouded with tears. "He didn't need to attend class after being exempted, but he went every day just to see you." At that moment, Adam saw me behind the bookshelf. He froze. Then his face twisted with disgust, and he furiously frowned. "What are you doing here?" He stormed over and shoved me aside. "Get out, you're dirtying Oscar's only peaceful place. If it weren't for you clinging to him, how would he have ended up like this?" After being shoved, my stomach twinged with pain. I steadied myself, then slapped him across the face. "What does it have to do with me? I never forced him to date me or marry me. He missed out on Freya because he was weak and pathetic." Suddenly, Freya's nasal-tinged voice rang out. "He didn't get the love letter I gave him?" Both Adam and I froze. "What did you say?" "Before the college entrance exams, I left a love letter on his desk, but he never responded." She laughed bitterly, then looked up, a hint of resentment in her eyes. "It was you, wasn't it?" She glared at me. "You were jealous of me, so you threw away the letter? You made us miss out on 10 whole years, and now we're separated by life and death." I didn't know about this. But Adam believed her. "You venomous woman." He gritted his teeth and lunged at me. My stomach hit the corner of the table hard. Pain erupted, and blood slowly oozed out. Everything went black, and I collapsed to the ground. When I opened my eyes again, I was holding a book, wearing my school uniform, standing in front of the utility room. Inside the room, a young Oscar was leaning against the wall, his fine black hair falling over his forehead. He looked at me with a hint of confusion. John, the school bully, was lazily sitting across from him, looking nonchalant. When he saw me, his eyebrows raised and his lips curled into a casual smile. "Top student, are you worried about him?" I just wanted to have a heart-to-heart with him. The sensation of the book in my hands didn't feel like a dream. My hands and feet turned cold, and hatred surged. The book dropped with a thud. I expressionlessly closed the door for him. Then I turned and walked away. But the sound of the door being violently pushed open came from behind. Oscar dashed past me like a gust of wind, leaving only a hurried silhouette. "What's the rush?" I was just asking him why he didn't sign up for any events in the sports meet. John mumbled, picking up the book I dropped and handing it to me. "No worries." A sense of foreboding gripped me. I quickly quickened my pace to follow. At the door of the classroom, Oscar stood there, staring blankly at Freya, who was playfully messing around with her deskmate inside. The setting sun cast a slanting glow, enveloping his figure in a soft halo. His gaze was gentle, yet filled with disbelief, as if he were trapped in a beautiful dream he didn't want to wake up from. My heart slowly sank. His demeanor no longer resembled the gloomy young man he once was. Instead, he looked like a refined professor from 10 years in the future. Oscar had also been reborn. "What's wrong with you?" John slapped him on the shoulder, not understanding, and squeezed past him into the classroom. "The class is about to start, stop blocking the door." I followed the memory and found my seat. This period was self-study. Around me, students were quietly studying. I casually opened a practice book and stared blankly at the neat, childish handwriting on the pages. Now that I had lived again, I couldn't make the same mistakes as before. My mind gradually cleared, and my mood slowly settled. Since Oscar had been reborn, he probably didn't want to have anything to do with me. This time, we would be like two parallel lines, never crossing. If he wanted to throw his life away, that was his choice. I needed to stay away from him, so his mess wouldn't spill over onto me. That was pretty disgusting. Just as I was thinking, Oscar's cold voice suddenly rang out. Tracy, give me your English notes. I looked up. What? He glanced at me sideways, his expression distant, as if he hadn't noticed that my actions were different from our past lives. Of course, he was so focused on Freya, he'd forgotten all the things I had done for him. Freya turned around when she heard Oscar and apologized. Sorry, I just asked Oscar to lend me his notes, but he said your English is better, so I came to ask you instead. She smiled sweetly, her eyes full of warmth, making it hard not to like her. Unfortunately, this trick wouldn't work on me. I won't lend them. I still need them myself. Not still need them, just that I didn't want to lend them at all. Freya's smile stiffened. Her desk-mate Adam, unable to tolerate this, turned around and snapped at me. Tracy, as the class president, it's your duty to help your classmates. Why are you acting like lending a set of notes is the end of the world? Hurry up and give them to her. Freya asked to borrow them because she respects you. Don't be so petty. His voice was loud enough that the other students looked over. Freya's expression darkened, though her eyes showed some contempt as she looked at me. Mabel, who had been silent, rolled her eyes, swallowing her spicy snack before she fired back. Stop moralizing. Why should we give you our notes, you ungrateful people who don't even know how to appreciate it? Just because your grades suck, does that make you right? Seeing that the two were about to start arguing, Oscar quickly intervened. Enough. Then, he turned to me, his voice softening, serious, but calm. Tracy, Freya struggles with English. Only by improving her English scores can she apply to a university in City A. I stared at him, feeling a little sad. He didn't continue, but I understood. Oscar's dream university in his past life was in City A, and he wanted to go there so he could be with Freya. In just a few minutes, he had already mapped out their future together. But I had never been treated with such seriousness. In our first month of marriage, he had taken a job in a distant city, returning home only once every few months and never even bothering to call me. It wasn't that he didn't know how, it was just that he didn't care. I lowered my eyes, feeling that my 10 years had been a waste. But Oscar thought I was hesitating. Weren't you always asking me to come over for dinner? It seemed like he suddenly remembered something. His pretty peach blossom eyes now gleaming with understanding. If you help Freya improve her English, I'll come over for dinner once a month. His tone was condescending, as if he were making a grand gesture. How could he have changed so much in this new life? Was he not even capable of speaking like a normal person anymore? I couldn't help but look up, locking eyes with him. Am I some kind of desperate person? Why do you think I should suffer all the time? Oscar's expression faltered for a moment. He was about to speak, but the class teacher suddenly opened the door and walked in. He was holding a thermos and announced that the registration for the T University entrance exam was now open. Oscar had passed this very exam in his past life to get into T University. But I hadn't applied. Oscar and I both raised our hands. He looked at me in surprise, seemingly not understanding why I was making a different choice than I had in our previous life. Tracy, you're signing up too? Freya asked, confused. Her voice was soft, almost mocking. The most important thing in life is to know your limits. You might get into a decent university with some effort, but compared to Oscar, you're still miles away. Signing up would just waste your time. Or maybe you just want to attract someone's attention. She shot a glance at Oscar, who was listening intently to her, her words loaded with implication. How could she be so sure I wouldn't succeed? In my past life, I hadn't signed up because I didn't want to compete with Oscar for a spot. His family was struggling, and if he got into the university through the exam, he could use the extra time to work and save up for tuition. But instead of working, he wasted all his time at school, just so he could see Freya more often. I sighed softly and spoke. Why do you care? Is this something someone who's at the bottom of the class should be concerned with? Freya's eyes instantly filled with tears. Seeing her beloved being humiliated, Oscar, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Apologize to Freya. She's only trying to help you, and you're being so ungrateful. And if you want to get my attention, you don't need to use such ridiculous methods. His tone was cold. Treating your future as a joke. Tracy, don't be so childish. What a sick mentality. I ignored him and raised my hand to get the teacher's attention. Teacher, I'd like to change seats. There's a dog barking around me, and it's affecting my studies. Oscar's face darkened, and he coldly stared at me. The homeroom teacher seemed confused, but still agreed. After class, I moved to sit next to John. He always took the last row to sleep, and no one dared to disturb him. It was quiet, and I was quite satisfied. As I packed my things, I caught a glimpse of Freya leaning slightly backward, her long black hair cascading over Oscar's desk. The young man lowered his gaze, quietly watching. After a moment, his fingers twitched, gently picking up a strand of hair with restraint and reverence. I rolled my eyes. On the first night we got married, he went to sleep in the guest room. Because my hair had fallen on his pillow, he found it disgusting. I disgust him? Does he really think his white moonlight is some clean and saintly figure? Without Oscar, my day went surprisingly smoothly. After school, the homeroom teacher kept me to help him grade papers for a while. By the time I reached the neighborhood, it was almost dark. A few aunties walking their dogs chatted as they walked. Did you hear? That crazy person in Building 3, he beat his son so badly that the son called the police and had him sent to a mental hospital. I even went to see him. It's tragic. The kid looks so obedient. How could anyone beat him like that? I paused. We live in Building 3. And that crazy person is Oscar's father. In my past life, he went crazy and beat Oscar, leaving him covered in bruises. I always kept a little first aid kit under my desk to help him treat his wounds. I'd suggested calling the police before, but he thought I was interfering. It seems that in this life, he's chosen not to endure anymore. I didn't walk much further before I saw Oscar curled up on a bench. Blood was trickling down his forehead, making his face look unnaturally pale. The lights around flickered, and the cold wind blew his messy hair. Suddenly, our eyes met, and I was caught off guard by the confusion in his gaze. I quickly looked away, expressionless, ready to turn and leave. Tracy, he called me. Then, as if realizing something, his expression returned to its usual coldness. What are you doing here? What's wrong with him? I found him annoying and quickly quickened my pace. But he suddenly scoffed. His hoarse voice came from behind. Don't think I don't know. You're here to be the savior. You love to step in and help when others are at their lowest, acting all high and mighty. You think this will make me like you? Quite the opposite. I hate how hypocritical you are. I froze. When I realized what he had said, I trembled with anger. Is this really how he sees me? My care and affection for him were just high-handed charity in his eyes? Had I spent 10 years loving such a foolish, confused person? You're wrong, I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone calm. I'm not here to be a savior. Then, I quickly walked forward, swung my right hand, and slapped him hard. I'm here to kick you while you're down. TCH, ungrateful jerk. After slapping him, I gave him a harsh glare and turned to leave. Oscar was left standing there, stunned. Ever since I slapped that ungrateful jerk, I felt much better. My mood's been lighter, and even my chest feels clearer. At school, we continued to act like strangers. Occasionally, I'd hear news about him and Freya. He hand-copied hundreds of pages of notes for Freya. He fought with some local thugs for Freya. He biked miles to buy fresh pastries for her. When I asked him to pour me a glass of water back then, he'd call me troublesome. Ah, true love really is different. I felt indifferent about it and even wanted to call him a fool. I had loved Oscar not just because of his stunning appearance. I admired his intelligence and clarity, his coldness, and his fragile, tragic hero persona. But now that I think about it, if I had followed his path, I wouldn't be worse off. Why admire strength? I am strong myself. After leaving Oscar, my life gradually fell into place. Mabel, who disliked the toxic atmosphere around Oscar, also moved to the back row and spent every day asking me to help her with the lessons. When John saw the study materials I had prepared for the T University entrance exams, he suddenly decided to stop sleeping and study with Mabel and me. He actually improved by the time of the midterms. His parents warmly invited Mabel and me over for dinner. At the dinner table, his mother affectionately grabbed my hand, wanting to adopt me as her goddaughter. But John stopped her. He leaned back with his hands in his pockets, casually saying, "Mom, if you want to adopt someone, there are other ways." I pretended I didn't understand and lowered my head, playing with the little dog under the table. The dog was so cute that I couldn't resist giving it a piece of chicken breast. The dog excitedly did 2 backflips for me. See? Even the dog knows how to show gratitude. Yet some people don't. The exams were approaching, and I began to intensively follow my study plan. Oscar gradually faded from my view. The next time I encountered him was at the entrance of the sports equipment room. The PE teacher had asked me to pick up a basketball for class. As soon as I reached the door, I saw Oscar standing there. His head was lowered, and his eyes were red, looking like a lost puppy. The door to the equipment room was slightly ajar, and I could clearly hear Freya and her friend talking inside. "Freya, you still dare to eat the stuff he gave you? His dad's a crazy person. Who knows what kind of virus he might carry?" Her friend sounded disgusted. "Don't say that. It's not about viruses," Freya's voice floated out, "it's in his genes. You see, he always has that gloomy face. He must have inherited something from that old madman. But it's fine, it's just for fun." Her friend laughed loudly, "Ha ha ha, but he seems pretty serious. I heard he's working 3 jobs to support you. So pathetic, he's such a bootlicker. Just a fool, he'll fall for anything." Freya sneered, "By the way, don't say this stuff in front of him. Pretend to be obedient. I haven't had enough fun with this little mad dog yet." Oscar's hand, holding the cake, trembled slightly. "It must feel bad to see your white moonlight fall from grace." "Well, he deserves it." Hearing Freya's words, I finally understood. With her personality, in the past life, she probably never wrote Oscar a love letter. She only said those things to slander me and provoke Adam. In this life, I don't want to be part of their dramatic love triangle, so I turned to leave. But Oscar grabbed my wrist tightly. "Let go." I couldn't break free and was dragged outside. He pressed me into a corner like a madman. His once cold eyes were now filled with hatred. "Did you spread the news about my father? Tracy, are you satisfied now? Do you really like me that much? Are you willing to destroy my relationship with her?" I kicked him away in anger. After spending 10 years together, there should be some basic trust, even if there was no love. But luckily, I had already stopped hoping for anything from him. I looked at him coldly. "Oscar, are you paranoid? Didn't you say yourself on the first day you transferred here that it was your father's fault? Like me? You really have thick skin. Freya's right, you really are a fool." Unexpectedly, Oscar didn't refute. It was as if some belief inside him was collapsing inch by inch. He slid down the wall slowly, as if drained of all strength, until he collapsed onto the ground. I looked down at him from above, feeling an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. I completely understood the feeling of watching your lover fall apart in front of you. After all, when I pushed open the gate of the villa back then, I was feeling the exact same way. It's truly a case of karma. His messy hair fluttered in front of his face. Oscar lowered his head, his eyes blank, his expression numb. He remained motionless, leaning against the wall like a shattered jade, lonely and tragic. I watched him closely, enjoying the hopeless expression on his face. I almost wanted to take a picture so I could laugh at it when I was feeling down. Suddenly, he let out a light laugh. As he laughed, tears began to pour from his eyes. "Huh? Has he really gone mad?" I heard him mumble almost inaudibly, "It was my fault. I shouldn't have." In that instant, I suddenly understood. Oscar was a smart person. During this time, he had probably noticed Freya's strange behavior. But in the past 10 years, he had invested too much emotion into that illusory bubble. So, he had been deceiving himself. Now, the filter had been cruelly shattered. He couldn't believe it. He didn't want to admit that he had sacrificed his life for someone like her. So, he pushed the blame onto me, the innocent one. I looked at Oscar, whose eyes were red, and sneered. No matter past or present, he was still the same coward. I didn't want to watch him regret and lose his mind, so without hesitation, I turned and walked away. leaving him behind, crying and laughing by himself. I'm not as foolish as Oscar. Having been given a second chance at life, I wouldn't waste time on someone unworthy, turning myself into a shell of a person. I had already convinced my parents to invest in some emerging industries. And I had helped Mabel improve her grades significantly. Not getting into her dream school had been Mabel's biggest regret in her past life. This time, she would finally get her wish. Everything was moving in a positive direction. After that day, I heard that Oscar and Freya had a falling out. But that had nothing to do with me. The only thing that concerned me was that he was no longer revolving around Freya, and instead was burying himself in his studies. After all, he had taken the exam in his past life, so he probably remembered some of the questions. I could only outwork him if I wanted to beat him. Both Mabel and John noticed I was acting differently. But they both quietly chose not to interfere. The day the exams ended, I walked out of the exam hall. The sunlight wasn't too strong or too weak, gently spreading on the road like a satisfied little cat in the afternoon, calm and beautiful. The test had gone smoothly, and I could finally relax. John was holding 3 drinks, waiting for me with Mabel at the entrance. He waved at me, his messy hair blown neatly by the breeze, full of youthful, carefree energy. I hurried over. He lowered his head and handed me the milk tea. His handsome features, once carefree, were now focused and gentle. Come on, let's go eat. After we ate, I spent the afternoon at the amusement park with them, playing like crazy. I hadn't been this happy in a long time. Since being reborn, my mind had been on edge. But today, I finally felt the long-lost relaxation. It felt like all my worries disappeared, and a strange sensation seeped through my pores, awakening my lifeless cells. It was like I was alive again. In the days that followed, I became the most idle of all. Every day, I was sent to buy food for Mabel and John. This morning, Mabel was shouting for beef noodles from the school south gate, so at lunch, I dutifully ran the errand for her. As I left the school gate, I brushed past a familiar-looking thug, who said, "Don't worry, babe, the guy who bullied you has already been taught a lesson." He was leading a few of his underlings, casually getting into a van. Then I remembered. This guy was Freya's thug ex-boyfriend, the one who had once come to pick her up at the school gate. I was puzzled and turned into a side alley, where I saw Oscar, his head covered in blood, next to a trash can. Oh, so it was him they were dealing with. Good job, thugs. But now I'm starting to wonder, am I really some kind of curse to him? Why is it that every time he ends up in such a pathetic state, I'm always there just in time to laugh at him? Looking down at the Oscar lying on the ground, I raised my leg, preparing to step over him. But he suddenly reached out and grabbed my ankle tightly. Still alive? Such a pity. His eyes were dazed, as if he couldn't tell dream from reality. He muttered, "Tracy, it's you again, saving me." Let go. His hand was cold and sticky, and I felt disgusted. But he held on tightly, and I couldn't break free. So I bent down and pried his fingers open, one by one. His lashes fluttered lightly as he stared at me, his eyes filled with a nauseating sense of longing. "Tracy, are you done playing hard to get? I'm giving you a chance to save me." Before, I didn't understand people. But now I realize, only you have been sincere with me. Don't mess around. Let's reconcile, okay? I froze for a moment. He didn't realize that I was also reborn? I had never made any secret of it. But in his self-righteous mind, he still believed I was the same Tracy who would never leave him, the one who stayed with him for 10 years. He thought all my odd behavior was just part of my game to lure him back. How confident of him. I lost my patience and stood up without hesitation, stomping down on the hand that was reaching for my ankle. He let out a cry of pain, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. If you're not going to talk like a human, then don't blame me for acting like a monster. I slowly ground my foot on his finger joints, speaking calmly. Oscar. Having been reborn, how come you've made no progress? His pupils constricted suddenly, and his face turned even paler. Tracy, wait, you too. I couldn't be bothered to listen any longer. I pulled my foot away and turned to leave. That evening, I was grading assignments as usual for the homeroom teacher. But when I went home, it started to rain. The rain was fine and dense, and there was a salty, damp smell in the air that made me feel uneasy. I was just about to enter the hallway when I suddenly saw a figure standing in front of my window. My apartment was on the first floor, and this person wasn't holding an umbrella. He stood there, motionless, staring at my home. I mustered up the courage to approach and saw that it was Oscar. How unlucky. Through the rain, I could see the deep sorrow in his eyes. When he saw me return, he instinctively wanted to get closer, but my repulsion stopped him. He froze in place. Tracy. I'm sorry. The raindrops fell one by one on him, as if they were bending his once proud spirit. After all this time, I finally heard an apology. But I didn't care anymore. I tightened my grip on the umbrella handle. I get it. Now, go away. He didn't move, standing silently, his eyes red. When I stood on the rooftop, I was heartbroken, thinking I'd lost my true love forever. But after I jumped, all I could think of was you. You were still waiting for me at home to have dinner. Freya was just an obsession from my youth. Tracy, the one I truly love is you. I scoffed. Love me? You love me, yet you were the first to go back to Freya after being reborn? You bought Freya so many cakes, but for my birthday, you wouldn't even cook me a bowl of noodles. Is that what you call love? I said it calmly, but Oscar's face grew even paler. Are you pathetic or what? Perhaps a person could be haunted for a lifetime by things they could never have in their youth. But that's not why he hurt me. Oscar closed his eyes in despair, his voice choking in his throat. Tracy, I know you hate me, but we've been together for 10 years. Please give me another chance, let's start over. Please? I took a deep breath, trying to calm my emotions, but the anger and frustration from my past life surged up in me. Why should I give you another chance? Do you even deserve it? I glared at him fiercely. The one thing I regret the most is wasting 10 years of my youth on you. When you painted all those portraits of her, did you ever think about how I'd feel? When you made your will and donated all your property, when you jumped off the building for your white moonlight, did you ever think about what would happen to me and the child we had? Oscar's head dropped lower and lower, but when he heard the last sentence, he suddenly looked up at me, his eyes wide. Child? We have a child? Boy or girl? How old are they? He took a step toward me, his eyes full of the surprise of someone just becoming a father. After a moment, he suddenly seemed to realize something, and the smile on his lips froze. I don't know, I said, my words cold and cruel. I was pregnant for a month, but your white moonlight and your best friend caused me to lose the baby. In truth, I didn't even know if I had died. I just wanted to wound him with my words. Oscar couldn't hold back any longer. He covered his face with both hands and sank to the ground, choking back sobs. I walked past him and into the house. Looking out at Oscar crying uncontrollably, I felt a strange sense of relief. It felt good. The pain shouldn't only belong to me. Oscar took a leave of absence from school. I was accepted into my dream school. Double joy. After the news of my acceptance came through, Mabel wanted to find Oscar to brag, but she couldn't find him. She had so much energy and nowhere to put it, so she focused it all on her studies. Her grades shot up like a rocket. After 100 days of hard work, she made the dream school her safety net. After I got accepted, I rarely went to school anymore. I only occasionally dropped off materials for Mabel and John. John said he wanted to attend T University with me and experience a campus romance together. But T University wasn't something you could just get into casually. Still, seeing someone work so hard to catch up to me, I was moved. So, I handed him a full set of past exams. John gritted his teeth. Tracy. I didn't even look up as I threw him another 10 sets of practice papers. What's wrong? Send me a couple more, this isn't enough. It was several months later when I heard from Oscar again. He stabbed Freya and Adam 8 times each, with every blow not fatal. Both of them were in the ICU and still unconscious to this day. The police searched for him for 3 days, but there was no sign of him. All the students and teachers were shocked by his brutality. Only I knew the truth, deep down, he was a madman. The police questioned his teachers and classmates. I was one of them. When I returned home from the police station, I took out my keys to open the door. Suddenly, a towel soaked in a pungent smell was pressed against my mouth and nose. I lost consciousness instantly. When I woke up, I found myself on the rooftop of an abandoned building, my hands tightly bound to a chair. Oscar, dressed in a suit, was standing with his back to me at the edge of the building, looking as though he was deep in thought. The cold wind blew, lifting dry leaves and gravel from the ground. A wave of despair rose in my chest. Hearing movement behind me, Oscar turned around. He casually lit a candle on the table. It was then that I noticed the table was full of all the dishes I loved. Oscar sat beside me, his delicate face half illuminated by the flickering candlelight, the other half hidden in darkness. What was he playing at? "What do you want?" I asked coldly, locking eyes with him. His lips curled into a gentle smile, and in his calm eyes, there was an almost imperceptible madness. "Tracy, don't you remember? I still owe you a wedding anniversary." He was insane. I stared at him, my voice steady. "Let me go home. You won't be able to hide with me for long." It seemed he didn't hear me. He served me a bowl of soup, speaking to himself. "It's our first anniversary. I made your favorite pork rib soup. Try it." I couldn't stand it. Impatiently, I interrupted, "Oscar, have you lost your memory? Do you need me to help you remember?" His hand froze in midair. "On our first anniversary, you used a camera to confess your love to Freya. You abandoned me and our child, jumping from the 18th floor, hoping to reunite with her in the stars and the sea. Do you remember now?" My tone was filled with mockery, and Oscar's eyes reddened instantly. He reached out and pulled me into his arms, his cheek pressed against my neck as he half pleaded, half whined. "Let's just have a nice day today, without bringing this up, okay?" After so many years, he knew exactly how to make me soften. In the past, whenever he acted spoiled, I would give in, heart softened. But now, all I felt was disgust. I kicked the table with my foot. The wine bottle tipped over and spilled dark red liquid all over him. He didn't react, didn't get angry. He simply lifted his hand and gently stroked my cheek, his eyes dark and heavy as he gazed at me, as though trying to imprint this moment in his heart forever. "Time is running out, Tracy." His lips curled into a faint smile, his dark pupils as still as the night. "What time?" I felt uneasy and instinctively moved away from him. "Don't be scared. I won't hurt you again," he said, noticing my movement, his voice bitter. I didn't believe him. In the distance, the sound of police sirens suddenly rang out. I let out a breath of relief. During the questioning at the police station, I had insisted on having a tracker placed on my body. I returned home alone to draw Oscar out. He bent down and kissed my forehead, as if saying a final goodbye. I heard him sigh softly. "Tracy, how did we end up like this?" It was all his fault. If he hadn't been so obsessed with Freya, if he had taken responsibility from the start, perhaps we could have been a happy family of 3 by now. But there was no what if. Fortunately, there was no what if. Suddenly, a blinding white light shone onto the rooftop, and I squinted my eyes. In the next second, red dots gathered on Oscar's body. He stood up, looking at me with reluctant eyes, slowly retreating step by step. I looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a sense of relief. In that moment, my hair stood on end. I suddenly realized. He knew this was my trap. And he wasn't planning to escape. When he reached the edge of the building, Oscar stopped. He gave me a reassuring smile, calm, yet full of despair. "Tracy, I'll redeem myself with my life." How dare he? My vision blurred with rage. "Oscar. Stop right there. How dare he end it all like that?" I couldn't let him escape so easily. He had hurt me, hurt others, he would spend the rest of his life in prison, repenting. "Tracy, I love you." The cool wind on the rooftop carried his whispered words, ruffling his messy hair as he leaned back. In a daze, I felt as though I was transported back to that summer afternoon. The air was humid and stifling, the walls of the classroom building old and peeling. The boy looked at me under the creaking fan, his ears tinged with pink, his voice soft and clear. "Tracy, do you like me?" After high school, we went our separate ways. Mabel did well in her exams and went to S University in the neighboring city. We would occasionally meet up during long breaks. John, however, didn't make the cutoff for T University by several ranks. Although he could have gone to another good university, he chose to retake the exams. Adam and Freya's injuries were too severe. They became vegetative and we didn't know when they would wake up. College life was busy but fulfilling. I tried many new things I hadn't experienced in my past life. Although I wasn't more outstanding than before, I was happy. After all, happiness was the rarest and most magical ability. Though my past life had been difficult and painful, it didn't stop me from falling in love with the world again. In the second year, during the back-to-school season, as the department head, I went to welcome the new students. A few younger students boldly came up to ask for my contact information, and I politely turned them down with a smile. Then, a familiar voice rang out. "You guys are hopeless. Let me show you how it's done." I looked up. Under the sunlight, John was lazily leaning against his suitcase, his gaze passing over the crowd to meet mine. "Senior, want a date? My dog can do backflips. And,